Yesterday, we kicked off the lock-in semifinals, and we were graced with a best of 5 that went the full 5 games. Let's hope we can get the same today, as I'm thrilled to have Primal, Mark Z, and special guest, 100 Thieves General Manager Papa Smithy, joining us for the LCS Countdown. Welcome back to the desk. Papa, I always love having you here, and it's nice to have your insight. Let's jump right in. What are your thoughts on the addition of the lock-in tournament to the kickoff of the season?
So I had some time to think about this, and honestly, I think the lock-in tournament provided a kind of central question for both the fans and the broadcast, I would say, but also the teams. Like for the fans and the broadcast, it's how serious would the players take the tournament? Like how much would it actually matter for them? And after a reverse sweep and seeing the devastated faces on the players and the coach, I can definitely tell you, everyone put their heart out yesterday trying to pick up the win, and obviously we're super disappointed to be eliminated. But there is also the other side, which is kind of like the org tinkering, the roster tinkering, the chance to try some stuff out on the Rift and then see how it lands before the World's implications come in. And that's the part where I look at a series where we played 5 games against Cloud9, a great opponent, one of the favorites for LCS. 4 of those games were in very winnable positions by the time the mid-game rolled around, and we could have taken down Cloud9 on the day. And I say that this is a great opportunity to see the flaws in our game, where we can still improve what we have to focus on for week 1. And when the World's implications come around, we would have learnings that we wouldn't have had before. So honestly, I think on both sides, it seems to have been a great show and a great chance for us to pick up central learnings and improve. So to me, it's a win-win.
Amazing to have that kind of perspective just 24 hours removed from what was a very tough loss. And again, I want to thank you for taking the time to come on the desk in light of that. Yesterday, we did see Cloud9. They brought us all the way to that 5th game, but they also completed that reverse sweep as they eliminated 100 Thieves for a spot in the final. They now await the winner of today's match, Evil Geniuses versus Team Liquid. But thinking back to yesterday's series, 100 Thieves proved beyond a doubt that they can build a gold lead and have a strong early game. But it did seem like they struggled a bit to close out the series in and of itself. Would you agree, Papa, that the failure came later in the stages of the games?
You can look at the numbers here and see that the early games were definitely not the issue. Like, we were able to generate leads. We're an aggressive team. We do that in scrims as well. On stage, everything's a little bit different, and there were definitely some flaws that we're looking back and reviewing on. So absolutely, that's, I think, what the numbers bear out and also what our prep shows.
Yeah, I think it was a super fun series to watch for that reason. Like, just the level of aggression that was coming out from 100 Thieves, mid lane. Damonte was all over the map, and it was really cool to see. But there definitely did feel like there was this kind of turning point in Game 3 with that failed dive that kind of went for a 3-for-0 against the Tom Kench. And after that point, it seemed like C9 found their footing in the series. And even though I think, 100 Thieves still proved to be a better coordinated team in the early game, C9 did start to figure out comps that were working for them. They started picking more globals themselves to kind of match that pressure.
Yeah, I totally agree, Mark, on finding the footing. And I think what we saw is that C9 in mid to late game situations has really good decisive shot calling. And that might actually be the $5 million Perks difference, right? We've been looking for Perks to show up this whole tournament. And I think he had a really, really good set of games overall, particularly after laning phase. But I think it was a shot calling that allowed C9 to exploit some of the mistakes 100 Thieves made mid and late game.
I think it's a great call out that it was the shot calling in the late game that Cloud9 really started to take a hold. And as well, Sven, I think as an individual, we got to call out as a top and consistent performer. That's been something that's core to his identity throughout his career. But Mark, returning to that 100 Thieves point just real briefly here, you mentioned Damonte playing well. I think the other big lane that we got to point out, of course, is Someday in the top lane. And so continuing to isolate those two players as individuals right out the gate here in 2021.
Yeah, this was the biggest mismatch of the series easily. Someday absolutely took Fudge to school, and it was something where I didn't know if they were ever going to get it under control, and I don't think it's fair to say that C9 ever did get it under control. And so it was great to watch Someday have such a great performance.
And I think the fans could obviously see the solo kill and the pop-off plays and the CSD, like all the visible indicators showing that Someday had a really good series. But for me, watching on with the player comms, the amount of leadership and ownership over the direction of the team and moving the macro ahead and being kind of like the kind of disappointed dad on any tempo issues or anything like that. Like, he was very much invested both in dominating his lane and getting us the competitive victory. So even though ultimately we weren't able to get there, I saw another level of Someday yesterday, even compared to the earlier weeks of the lock-in tournaments. That tells me he's warmed up and ready to go for the LCS start.
Yeah, and speaking of dominating lanes, we have to talk about Fudge, right? Like, he got bodied pretty much every single game, and it doesn't get easier for him from here, right? He's either going to face Impact or Alfari. Those are the two top laners in terms of CSD right now. So I think C9 looked really, really good in terms of shot calling and playing from behind. But at the end of the day, it takes 5 players to win a game, and when your top is getting slammed every game, I don't know how you can expect to take first. So they really need to address that.
All this talk about individual players, to me, opens up a really cool conversation. And with lock-in almost wrapped, I want to look at the breadth of competition that we have in the LCS and ask, ultimately, which lane do we feel is the most stacked when it comes to competition? Mark, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts?
All right, so for me, I'm looking at not just the top end about like how good, the top end is, but where the floor is of this position and, the volume of players in those two slots. And I have to go with AD carry for that reason. I feel like the top is so good, and there's so many players that fill that out. Tactical, FBI, Sven definitely have all been stomping early on in the lock-in tournament. But even just below them, people like Turtle, Johnson, Stix, they are all very, very respectable. Raze, we haven't seen yet, but he was a stud in the OPL. Loss hasn't quite been performing yet, but we know he was incredible in Academy. And Neo as well is someone who has an opportunity to step up. So you're looking at like currently potentially 8 out of 10 players being really, really good in their position.
I got to be honest, it is a little wild to me that in a year in which the LCS loses double lift, that we could be talking about the AD carry position as being the most stacked role in the league, just, flatly. But Papa, as well, I'm curious your take on the whole conversation.
I actually agree with Mark on the first point. If I was going to give it a 0 to 10 score on each of the players in AD carry, I think the average would be highest in AD carry. But what I want to focus on is this idea of the top half of the support role, so the other side of the bot lane. But our top 5 supports, the average level there is insane. I think in North America, support has rarely been as stacked at the top as it is right now. And we are seeing great supports on your screen at the moment. All of them unique, all of them different, a lot of them coming in from different parts of the world, and preparing for each of these supports is a headache. I can tell you that much from watching the draft meetings. So they're all unique and they all have their own flavor.
See, I love that different perspective, taking a look at the top or the upper echelon of a tier and saying how much more difficult it'll be to break into that. We brought this topic up earlier in the week in the midst of all of our story meetings. We actually had an analyst jump at the opportunity to defend yet another role. So let's get Emily Rand's take on which role has the stiffest competition in the LCS.
Thanks, Dash. I disagree. Throwing my hat in the ring for the jungle position. I think when we look at an entire position as the strongest in North America compared to others, we have to look at everything from the very top to the very bottom. So while I think you can argue that other positions might have stronger individuals at the top, especially with, obviously, you already mentioned Alfari coming over, Perks coming over. Let's take a look at the jungle position. I want to actually start at the quote-unquote bottom, where people were going into this lock-in tournament expecting that the worst jungler was going to be Iconic. And while he's had some errors in team fight positioning, I think you can look at his early game and it shows that he has a really good understanding of what Golden Guardians want to do early. They've been picking really good compositions that kind of give him that impetus to have a really good early game. And he's been smart about it. Then you have the notable names at the top, like Blabber, who's still been performing really well, despite the fact that I don't think he's had particularly good mid-jungle synergy with Perks. Closer, Jose Diodo coming in, Svensk Garen, even Dardoch's been doing really well, despite the fact that Dignitas themselves didn't look super great in this lock-in tournament. So that's my argument for jungle. Back to you guys, so you can argue how I'm wrong.
Emily, I'm going to let y'all finish, but this is the best top lane lineup we've seen of all time for NA. And look, the junglers are good, the 80s are good, but how many of these people have even made it out of groups at Worlds? Let's talk about top lane, all right? So we got Alfari, right? This is the same Alfari who was on Misfits that took SKT to 5 games at Worlds. This guy was on a 10th place team and still was rated the best top laner in LEC. We got Huni, who even if you think is the 5th best player in the top lane position, this guy has won an MSI. This guy's made it to a finals of Worlds. This guy has consummated a 18-0 split in LEC, and maybe he's not super hot right now, but I think he's like middle of the pack. So let's talk about who's above him, right? We got Impact. This guy's been playing for 9 years. He's had 6 Worlds appearances, and he's still looking super, super strong. And we got Licorice, right? Another all-pro player who is on FlyQuest, so arguably on a weaker team, but I expect him to be super, super strong going into the split. And then last, but of course not least, Someday, who we just saw manhandle top lane with 70 CS lead. So look, at the end of the day, some of these guys look good in NA, but all the guys I've talked about have looked good internationally.
You can tell who Papa thinks is the top lane list there based on the reactions. Mark, for me, what's interesting is the criteria that everyone's using ultimately to determine which lane they think is the most stacked, and everybody's gone in different directions.
Yeah, it's really fun. There's a lot of different perspectives and angles you can take. The one thing that we can all agree on is that it's not mid. No one went for mid.
Nobody picked mid for most stacked lane in the LCS. And with that, let's move ourselves right along. While we have my friend Papa Smithy on the desk, we figured this would be a perfect opportunity to have him answer some of our questions. All we ask of you, Papa, just keep it 100, baby. Just keep it 100. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. I myself have a couple questions from Twitter. I know these guys have a couple questions of their own. So question number 1 does come from Twitter. Anders says, how much contact and cooperation is there between the 100 Thieves main, academy, and amateur teams? Is this part of your org's plan to succeed?
Definitely, it's one of our big things that ever since we came into amateur, was connecting the different levels. I think last year, one of our self-reflections was lack of integration between LCS and academy, even though we had that integration between academy and amateur. So this year, pretty regular scrim blocks between LCS and academy. We have an initiative on our Discord server where players at all different levels can ask questions alongside our coaches and get answers from the other players, and obviously direct contact as well. So bringing the players in and kind of seeing what they cook up between themselves is definitely one of our big pillars this year.
I mean, 100 Thieves, one of the orgs leading the charge, I think, when it comes to the development of talent. And that was made very clear last year with some of those initiatives, including 100 Thieves Next. What do you got for us, Primal?
All right, so I want to know from a GM's perspective, Papa. C9 paid $5 million for perks, but in exchange, they lost the best top laner, or maybe second best top laner in the league. Do you think that's worth?
I think money isn't always an interesting thing to talk about when it comes to the LCS. I think people want what they want, and wanting perks is something that every team in the world should be looking at and coveting. So I think in that case, if it was a direct kind of like you must lose this to get this, I think you take perks every time.
Wow.
Kind of along that same vein, without knowing the actual runnings of each team, it's kind of hard to know. But were there any moves in particular this offseason that you looked at and you were like, ooh, that was a good one? Did any move surprise you from one of these teams that you really liked?
That's a good question. I think bringing in Jose Diodo has been kind of a pretty astute choice for FlyQuest. I think I'm also thinking about that from like the businessman perspective, where obviously his Argentinian fan base is following right there as well. But he's obviously a super talented player with flair, so I'm excited to see how far he can go in the LCS.
Well, we saw it, right? As soon as he was able to make it here to North America.
Twitch chat only has one thing to talk about.
That's true, right? Yeah, first of all, already some brilliant copy pastas. But beyond that, I was just going to say kind of you saw that injection of life into the FlyQuest squad. Winless until he arrives, a kind of new energy. Definitely needs some time, to work together and synergize, but we'll see if they can get there. Next up, Gabe on Twitter asks, favorite series or match that you wish you could have casted? You've had the privilege of casting and analyzing some pretty top-tier series, but is there anyone out there that you were just a viewer for and you were like, oh, I want to get in there?
So I think for the soul of this question, like particularly casting, I was on the desk for Rocks Tigers SKT, but I obviously would have loved to cast that World Semifinal back in 2016. I think when it comes to not being on broadcast, being a fan, definitely some of the early Champions finals and semifinals, the Web for Esports final between KT and SKT with the Faker versus Ryu 1v1. Definitely those early days that were formative in my identity as a caster would have been exciting to actually be on the casting desk for as well.
I'm sorry, all I heard was I didn't enjoy being on the analyst desk next to Dash during that 2016 SKT Rocks.
Relatable.
Best series ever. But, whatever. No, honestly, too, if I could have casted that series, I would have. I think undoubtedly one of the best series in history. All right, Primal, you're up next.
All right, so following up on the C9 question about perks, compared to your expectations of perks in the C9 roster, how have they been stacking up? Do you think perks has sort of proven his worth as an import, or do you feel like there's more that we need to see from him?
I think it's really, really early hot take territory to make too many sweeping thoughts on what Perkz is and isn't. Even G2 fans know that G2's performance in early weeks of the season compared to playoffs is always going to be night and day. I thought he played well yesterday, so I think very much he is going to be the core of their success, the barometer. I think if Perkz is fully on form, then the team can go super far, and they'll be definitely one of our hardest opponents, whatever the Perkz litmus test proves.
All right, Mark, bring us home, baby.
All right, saving the best for last. What did the team have for dinner last night? And if they had won, what would you have gotten them?
Interesting question. I mean, they would have gone straight into scrims today. They actually have a day off today. So what did they have? We kind of departed and everyone kind of did their own thing for dinner. That's usually the way it goes after the last game of a week. But the steak dinner, the Boa Steakhouse, etc., that's usually reserved for the actual final day of the week. So that would have been a Sunday evening tradition.
Gotcha. Okay, follow-up question. What should Mark get for dinner tonight?
Good question. Do I have any hot recommendations at the moment? I recommend Chipotle. Get Chipotle, baby.
Boom, there it is. Get in there, Mark. Put the order in now. It'll be here by the end of the broadcast. All right, we're going to take a quick breather, but when we return, we'll break down today's lock-in semifinals between Evil Geniuses and Team Liquid. Stay tuned.
Keen back again with a couple of thoughts ahead of the Team Liquid versus EG best of 5 today. I read a comment on Reddit recently, which means, of course, that all of you think this, and I'm not just cherry picking an argument so I can be right on air, and you can't. The comment said, EG is the we have that at home version of TL, which implies that this person thought EG and Team Liquid have a similar playstyle, and that EG is just kind of the bootleg version of Team Liquid. I obviously do not think that is correct. I think these two teams are very different. Santorin mentioned in his post-match interview last week that EG plays the way he used to play on FlyQuest, which feels like a much more accurate comparison to me, in that FlyQuest was a mid-jungle centric team that had Ignar roam up and kind of support a lot of the plays they would make in the mid area of the map. The big difference is Jizuke and Power of Evil are very different players. Jizuke, he's always just kind of up into your face. And the one constant being Ignar is also another in-your-face kind of player. I think that he has meshed well and will continue to mesh very well with his EG roster. They've got, and I mean this in a very complimentary way, really good dumbass energy. They're just always going to be in there. And you pair that with a couple calm players in Impact and Deathly, and I think you've got a really good recipe for success. See, dumbasses go in, create havoc, and the other guys come in and clean up the mess. I think this match will end up being very close because I never thought Alphari was a huge upgrade over Impact. I think Alphari gives them more options and more diversity, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a net upgrade over Impact, who I think is a very stable option and lets you play the game around other parts of the map because he's such a strong weak side top laner. So going to this match, keep an eye out on top lane. If Impact wins the lane, play this recording again a couple times, and make sure you let everybody know I'm right. And if Impact loses to Alphari, especially if it's really bad, I will not be back next week. Back to you, Dash.
Welcome back to LCS Countdown. You got to look at Keen's thoughts heading into EG versus Team Liquid. Make sure you take a look at his articles as well, available on lulesports.com. And Mark, I mean this in a good way. You have the best dumbass energy on the desk. Now, a reminder that the winner of Lock-In gets to make a $50,000 donation to a charity of their choice. For Team Liquid, that would be the Games and Online Harassment Hotline, a free anonymous text-based service where you can get some support from someone within the gaming community. For Evil Geniuses, they will direct their winnings to the Child's Mind Institute, a national nonprofit benefiting those with mental health and learning disorders. Either way, I'm really happy to see gaming for such good causes. Yesterday, though, we saw how important and volatile the top lane can be in the current meta, so it seems fitting to me that we look at the same position for today's series. First, though, a word from Alphari himself ahead of his matchup against Impact.
Hey, so I've been asked what I think about my upcoming match against EG, and specifically about laning against Impact. And, well, I definitely have some respect for Impact. I don't think he's a bad player. I also think that he seems quite predictable and conservative early game. So I'm not really worried at all. I'm feeling very confident. And I think that as long as I pay attention to Jizuke and Ignar, who like to roam a lot, then I should be, in a pretty comfy spot early game. So that's what I expect.
Top lane matchup. Alphari's not too worried while still paying respect to Impact as an opponent. Primal, you're the one who called out this lane as the most competitive in the LCS. So how are you feeling about this specific matchup?
Well, it's definitely going to be a banger, I can tell you that. And, if we look at these guys statistically, they're both extremely good in lane. Impact tends to be more conservative with the picks, but he does play aggressively and denies CS advantages to his opponents. But when we look at how they play the map, it's actually very different, with Alphari looking for a lot of solo kills, a lot of side lane plays by himself, and Impact looking for flanks and to join the team. That said, Impact did say in an interview recently with Travis Gafford that he feels like on TL, he was not unlocked to play aggressively and try to carry, and he thinks that Jizuke in particular likes to roam to the top and break him open. So we'll see that if the new help that he's getting on EG allows him to unlock that big positive dumbass energy.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because Alphari's not getting a ton of help either, in terms of his jungle proximity. He is the lowest. So it does speak a little bit to that point about not getting a ton of help, but Alphari doesn't feel like he needs it, and he just kind of stays on that island and keeps dominating. That's where the solo kills are coming from. His goal difference at 20, while his 10 is behind Impact, his 20 soars to the top of the standings with almost 20 CSD. So he has a really different playstyle, and you can see that in the champions as well. And I think this is one of the big reasons that they turned to Alphari in the offseason for Team Liquid was they wanted more carries. They wanted a deeper champion pool, someone who's going to have enchanters in his back pocket, who's going to have side lane carries like Kayle and Camille more so than the kind of team fight oriented ones.
Yeah, and Impact's been on the interview trail quite a lot recently, and I think another point he raised was he felt like he had more of the carry-orientated and maybe even utility-orientated picks than perhaps he could unleash on TL, like he'd been, placed in a box over what TL Impact is. And now on EG, yes, we've seen the Renekton lookbook, but what else he has, I think, remains a bit of a mystery, but could actually be one of the big turning points of the best of 5.
Right, exactly. Maybe he'll get pushed to show us a little something different here in our 5 games today. But Mark, I think there remains the question then, if we're looking at the top lane to be slightly Team Liquid favored, where else can EG find an advantage and ultimately beat TL?
Well, kind of, once again, going back to that quote by that Primal pulled, Jizuke, I mean, he is way more active on the map. He's way more aggressive than Jensen. I would not go as far as say he's a better player. That's not my opinion, but I think he can have a bigger impact on games than Jensen has had so far in the lock-in tournament because he's willing to really go out there and make a risky play. That said, on the champions he's been on so far in lock-in, he's been pretty good about avoiding the big oopsies that hand those advantages back to the enemy team. His Syndra's been really clean. It's been really safe. He's been respecting his opponents a lot more this year.
I think with that, as we see a couple of the champions that he's chosen to play throughout the tournament so far, TF, Ryze, 2 of the big ones that'll pop out to me in terms of being able to roam and affect the map. Papa Smithy, I think you always got to have more than one avenue to victory, though, and if Jizuke is one of them, I think most people would look at Ignar as one of the other big playmakers for EG.
Yeah, I can definitely attest from all the team meetings I was in last year how much prep goes into just denying Ignar. It's always a bit of a mini game. You know he's going to be on an engaged champion. Every time you set up around an objective, you need the team to be talking about where's Ignar. If you don't have eyes on him, he's probably in position to punish you in a really big way. So this is definitely a player you can never sleep on, and he's probably one of the most prepared for players and the most defined players of really anyone in the LCS when it comes to the prep and also your expectations of what he'll provide.
That being said, his matchup today is against none other than tactical in-court JJ Primal, the focus of our conversation around best bot lane in the North American region.
Yeah, and Impact, another thing he said in that interview is that if his bot can handle TL's bot, he thinks he'll be okay. But I got bad news for you, man. No one's been able to handle TL's bot so far. He's been getting 2v2 kills. Core JJ's been getting the aggressive playmaking picks to set everyone up. So right now, they're top in CSD. They're top in pretty much every stat. I think EG's going to have their hands full with this one.
I mean, in a lot of ways, it was 100 Thieves so far that has shown us kind of the best resistance to Team Liquid. And even then in the 2v2, we saw Tactical Core JJ finding a few advantages, and it was mid to late where 100 Thieves would ultimately take it when they met in the group stage. A couple notable names, though, that we have yet to mention here, Papa Smithy, and I don't think we can go into an LCS best of 5 without talking about Jensen and Santorin, 2 major names here.
And honestly, now that we're no longer competing, one of my big questions looking at our potential opposition for the LCS crown is Team Liquid, how they shape up, what they'll look like, and this idea of what Jensen and Santorin will represent as a duo is one that I don't think anyone has a clear answer on based on 1 week of stage games. You think back to last year, and it was very much Santorin in the facilitator role for the mages that Power of Evil like to play, but now that PoE's jumped in with Speaker, we saw him on TF and other looks. Santorin and how he fits in with Jensen, whether that will affect Jensen's champion pool, remains a question. And can they afford to play so mid-centric if Alphari is going to be playing these carry picks? These are all the questions that I'm sure even TL, Santorin, Jensen, and Alphari don't have all the answers to. But how it develops in a best of 5 where any of those places that aren't kind of like well-trodden territory for TL could potentially be like pulled very, very thin in a full best of 5.
A minute to go until game time. I want to know where the three of you are throwing your weight when it comes to predictions. So let's go down the line. Papa, you get to kick us off.
I think the TL is the easy choice. I have them at 3-1 here because I think EG have shown some really good looks. Do they have enough of a lookbook for a best of 5 victory, enough unique strategies that can't be banned out? My impression is no, but I'm ready to be wowed and impressed.
All right. Primal?
It's going to be a TL 3-0, and I hate to say it because I really do like this EG lineup, but at the end of the day, there's just not many avenues to win, and the avenues that are available to EG to win, primarily I think through Jizuke popping off or making roams to top lane, are going to be super obvious to TL, so TL 3-0.
Mark, I don't have much hope for an EG prediction here, but what do you got for me?
No, I don't have much. I'm going TL 3-0 as well. Like
Okay.
you said, I bring a certain kind of energy, and it's
Negative.
TL.
Yeah, it's the downer energy. Yeah, nice. Thanks, Mark. All right, well, a big thank you as well to our friend Papa Smithy for joining us here on the desk today, along with Mark Z, as we'll be saying goodbye to the both of them here as we get into game 1. And welcome Azael in Crumbs to the analyst desk to break it down on the back half. For now, though, we're going to kick it over to the casters to get this series underway.